Hello everybody, and welcome back to another lesson, video, whatever you want to call it, in finding freedom. Now, this is not based upon a lot of other things, maybe searching for Bobby Fischer, finding Forrester, Fast and Furious, so on and so forth, etc., 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 etc. But in this lesson, I want to talk about the integratedness and the interchangeable parts of, well, not only words and vocabulary and verbiage, but the way society is being dictated to understand certain things, right? Because a lot of people don't understand the words that are coming out of their mouth all the time based upon definition. And is that a good thing or bad thing? See, if you tie yourself to a certain definition of a word, well, if I only speak English, when I say something and you're able to pick something up, right? So on and so forth. So if I were to use my pen, because this was out of focus, right? Now, if I go and use my stylus, where is it? Here it is. And I tap right here. Now it comes into focus a little bit clearer, right? So it's very interesting, right? Now, let's talk about why things rhyme, right? So like knife, wife, life, and strife, right? And that's going to be in the title. You'll see that for a reason, right? Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the movie The Sound of Music with Julie Andrews, if I remember correctly. I think that's who it was. I think she also played Mary Poppins and a couple other things. However, in that movie, it was her responsibility. You know, they talked about her, Maria, and all this other stuff. And she left for a little bit. And she fell in love with this gentleman, high-ranking officer in the military, took care of all his children, so on and so forth, taught them certain things, how to be a little bit softer instead of being so disciplined, right? And of course, you can see the transition of this later on when you get to movies like The Pacifier, right? Where everybody's running all over the place, and then all of a sudden, what's it called? You have somebody that steps in, right? So you have Philomena or whoever. Oh no, The Pacifier is Vin Diesel, right? Pretty sure it's Vin Diesel. And he's like a former Navy SEAL and all these other things. And he's doing the same things that you normally get taught in boot camp, but the same thing similar to what the nun did for the person in the Navy. See, what happened was there was too much order. By the time The Pacifier came, there was too much chaos, right? And when that occurred, well, certain things had to happen, right? So when those things happened, excuse me, I'll look up a little bit more so people can see all my teeth. When certain of those things happen, one of those things that occurred was the fact that, you know, there was a lot of chaos. I think the husband was killed or kidnapped or something. There was next door neighbors. You guys could go ahead and figure that out. And then, of course, when that occurred, they called somebody in because they needed a babysitter, bodyguard, and everything else. So, hence the movie The Pacifier, right? And then, of course, there was the wrestling incident. The kid that wanted to like be different, didn't know how to express himself. They felt confined and trapped because of all the dogma, so on and so forth, that who is it? Steve Jobs once talked about, etc. And then, of course, later on, as things go on, and this happens with time as well, there was a movie that came out called The Sound of Freedom, right? So first we had The Sound of Music. Now we have The Sound of Freedom. Now, what was The Sound of Freedom about? Well, it was about the trafficking of children. Oh my God, you're so beautiful. You should come over here. This, that, and the third, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that Ballard wasn't allowed to do was go beyond a certain point, right? Because they wouldn't cover it, so on and so forth. And he kept seeing all these things happen. Now, this was played by the gentleman who played the Count of Monte Cristo, and another movie, a TV show, Persons of Interest, POI. Not Plenty of Fish, but POI, right? And so, you know, when I saw this, I was like, Sound of Freedom, Sound of Music. Okay, so what is a psalm? Right? S-O-M, if we're going based off of the first letter of each word, right? And then who's really soft? Or soft? Or sofa, right? I mean, people will take acronyms and they will go ahead and, collaborate and try to come up with ideas in their mind of what it could be, so on and so forth. And it's like the astronomers and everybody else, it's like a fly. I had a lady say 2 flies, 1 catch. And I asked her if she knew what a Venus flytrap was. And, you hear people say, shut your trap, so on and so forth, and things like that. However, if a fly gets too curious, you have tiki torches, right? And if you have tiki torches, well, the fly will go ahead and keep going, and then they get burned. Or there's like a violet or violeta light, so on and so forth, and the fly's like, ooh, and it gets closer and closer and closer, and then it goes and gets zapped, right? And this is the same thing that happened, because out of the lineup that I just gave, you had the Sound of Music, The Pacifier, down to the Sound of Freedom, and the rumors that were coming out, right? It's one of those things that people don't really understand completely. And that's the thing. If you don't keep reading, you won't understand completely, right? Now, if you watch Star Wars, and I know I'm going to connect this in a second, but you got to move forward and then go back so you could connect the dots for the people. So in Star Wars, you have Execute Order 66 by Palpatine, so on and so forth, etc. The thing is, when Palpatine used his force and powers like that, I noticed there was a different hue or a slightly different color, so on and so forth, that came out of his fingertips and things like that. And it was one of those things that, it just kept going and going and going. And I noticed that the dark side had red, and then their lightning sometimes was like blue or purple or something like that. But then I looked at the other lightsabers, and there was a few, like a small few, that had purple lightsabers, right? The counselors, so on and so forth, etc. Then you had the green lightsaber, so on and so forth. You had a blue one, an orange one, a white one, so on and so forth. And everybody got theirs accordingly, right? Now, if we were to Tarantino this, there's only 66 books in a certain grouping, right, of certain things, right? But there's more, right? So now let's work backwards. When we work backwards, Order 66, they're human trafficking children and all these other things, etc. Why are they stealing children, first of all? Telling them that they could be models, they could be this, they could be that, blah, 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 this, that, and the third, right? That's one thing. It's like Hansel and Gretel, right? And so they're, I got candy, I got this, I got a lot of money, I got a big house, I got a nice car, I got a big hoo-ha. You could see me, look, I'm gonna put my tight shirt on, you can see all my muscles, I look sexy. Oh my God, this is so amazing. And then, of course, you go backwards, right? And then, of course, there's too much structure and the kids are like down and depressed, right? So obsession leads to oppression, which leads to depression, right? And Execute Order 66, which, 66 is not good anyways, right? If you matter of perspective and perception, that would be 69 or 6 and 9, so on and so forth, just for the optometrists to put on their glasses real quick. And so if you don't understand the optometrists and the doctors, so on and so forth, you have to continue reading or go to CE, which is a measurement of time, right? And continuing education is something that every professional has, right? Or am I wrong? I've spoken to attorneys, I've spoken to lawyers, I've spoken to judges, I've spoken to students, I've spoken to law officers, I've spoken to first responders, I've spoken to doctors in all different kinds of fields. I've spoken on both sides, both in the VA and on the civilian side. Don't get me started. And then I've also spoke to, the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, and all these other churches. And all the other religions. I even went with this awesome lady at one point with her boyfriend and this other guy. And I was like, hey, let's go check out the monks. I love, all this. Like, this is culture. This is what it's about. And people don't get that. They wonder why I'm so obsessed with the Renaissance Fair, right? And because it brings you back into a time where things were not only more simple, but people were able to do things more effectively and efficiently, as well as they were useful instead of being full of shit. right? So let's get into this. Now that we're 10 minutes in, if you got anything out of this, go ahead and smash that like button. Do not forget to share this with everybody. And please, by all means, go ahead and, if you want to, subscribe or follow or do something or tell somebody about it, tell somebody else to talk about it or be about it or brag about it, and then we can go ahead and get them and put them on stage and give them all the likings and likes and shares and comments and their income that they get digitally, right? Because Google pays on AdSense and everything like that, as well as viewership. And you could Google it if you want to, or you can use other platforms, so on and so forth. If you smell occasionally, you could use a Tor router or an onion router. But life is like, it's either a cake or an onion. And if you don't understand that analogy, I'm hoping one person does. But it's kind of like that, right? Because there's layers, just like levels to stairs, right? And so when you're getting into it, right, since there's more that are not mediocre, right? So when it comes to mediocre, T.I. had a song, I don't want no mediocre, don't want no mediocre. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Because you're stuck in one dialect, right? Now, there's nothing, or nothing, if you want to go ahead and go to the Caribbean, wrong with being, right? I-G, I-N-G, B-E-I-N-G, or the N-G, which is nasal, ing, right? It's a nasal sound, right? Other languages speak that as well. I think Tagalog is one of them. Standard or poor. So let me explain something. When it comes to finances, you have the Dow 30, you have NASDAQ, then you have Standard & Poor's, right? Now, Standard & Poor's are the S&P, right? 500, 1,000, 1,500, etc. is a different collective group of entities versus the Dow 30, as well as NASDAQ and everything else, right? So if you were to be an investor, would you rather be standard, which is a translation or synonym for mediocre, or average, so on and so forth? Now, what happens if you're poor? Well, how will you invest money? Well, those that want to showboat and have all the clout with all that have to pay taxes. But doesn't taxes pay unemployment? And if it pays unemployment, and it pays for housing, and it pays for everything else, then they can do whatever they want. They're paying your bills, so it's whatever, right? Now, they say money talks and bullshit walks, but I mean, in essence, we got people walking around all over. And then people are wondering why the people that own the greatest companies that make a lot of money only get paid a certain amount. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, how did they only pay $1? And it brought me back to this movie called Trading Places, where they were talking about orange juice. And they wanted to see if they could take a homeless man off the street. Excuse me. Homeless man off the street and turn him into a success story like they did with somebody else. Now, granted, the movie's wrapped up in metaphor, analogy, and entendre, but long story short, they were selling frozen orange juice, so on and so forth, a commodity. I think Warren Buffett should know about this, and Jay-Z should know about this as well, since they did an interview together, along with a couple other people. And commodities is something that, you know, it's interesting, right? Because it's a different type of intrinsic value. Then, of course, you have frozen orange juice, and they made a bet with $1, right? Now, if you've seen past videos of mine, people would understand why I got upset over $1, because I understood the scenario. But it was one of those things that triggered something within, right? Because I mean, face it, if you go back a little bit to what I stated earlier about 66, or if you flip one upside down, it's 69, etc. Then you have another one that goes up to 63. Then you have the Ethiopian Bible that goes up to, I think, 88, so on and so forth. And then of course you got, you know, other books, etc. out there. And then of course you have the Quran, you have Buddhism, you have the Vedas, right? Or Vedas. Their dialect is slightly different. However, it's like VE something. And so you have to understand all the books in order to understand that it not only keeps going, but the story is still being written. Where? I don't know. Where? I don't know. However, the thing about the stories is that there's more books. So it means it's a novel, right? Like the Iliad or something like that. And I'll get into that in a second. But let's talk about, you know, since we're in the topic of finances, and I talked about being standard or poor or the Dow 30, etc. Let's talk about taxes, interest, inflation, and tariffs. So I don't know if you guys see what I have written here, but if you were to take taxes, interest, inflation, put those two together, you make pi, and then you have tariffs, right? Now, I don't know if you know how to break things up, but I broke tariffs up into 3 sections, right? TAR, T-A-R, TAR. There was one time when I was younger, somebody came with a stick and put tar on my shoulder. And then 2, right? If, so on and so forth. So TAR, if, right? I-F. FS. What is FS? Free? I don't know. Or free and stupid? I don't know. But it's something, right? Because it's interesting, if I were to put the I in a capital form, right? Instead of just breaking it up. So if this little I right here and that little I, so on and so forth, and they say a little off the top, etc. If I were to go ahead and put just one bracket here or one straight line there, one straight line here, then I would be able to have the letter I, right? But what happens if that gets cut in half, right? You ever seen magicians where they do the thing where they saw people in half, etc.? Similar concept, right? Then there's checks and balances, right? So you have taxes, interest, those could be variable, right? You have variable or fixed interest rates, right? And this is something that's like, oh, she's interested in you. Oh, so she's neutered. Oh, so she's fixed. This is how you talk sometimes, right? This is the language of English, is it not? Because you take a pet so that it can't have any more children, you get them fixed. Now that's a fixed interest, right? Because you're interested in your pet. So you fix them so they can't have any more children. If it's a variable, meaning they can or cannot have children depending on the season or color, then you would be able to, well, you know, possibly pop one out. Who knows? But there's other ways of doing it, right? And then, of course, tar. Now, I was talking about the Bible and spiritual books, and they say from ashes you come and to ashes you shall return, right? However, there is always something that ashes or something can be turned into. See, when lightning struck sand, it created glass, allegedly, right? And then some people would call that obsidian, etc., or something else, right? If somebody were to pick up sand and hold it in their hand and let it fall and say, what's this, right? Just like I have water in here, right? This, and I have the little cap on top, so I'll turn it sideways. Looks like the letter I, right? Did you finish? Yep. Every last drop? Yep. So on and so forth, right? So that's what I'm referring to, if you understand what I'm saying. Most people don't ask questions like this. They just go along with the joke, right? Because people they're lazy. They don't want to be explained or told something, right? So it's one of those things like, oh, well, I got you. I just let you do all the work, and then so on and so forth. And I remember there was this kid named Chance who I took a chance on, no pun intended. And after he got, worked in the office, got deployment, and so on and so forth, etc., he cracked a joke one day. And he said, what you do is you find a white boy with good credit, and then you make the other person do all the work. That rubbed me the wrong way as a minority. Why? Well, who are the men that built America? Who are the men that laid down the tar and the gravel on the roads in which you drive so freely or carelessly on? It wasn't just one person. They had a crew. Now, when it comes to checks and balances, right? So, okay, how do we find checks? Well, checks are easy. What is that? Well, if you're playing in a game of chess, right? How can I move my pawn freely to get to the other side so that it can make something of itself, right? Go to the promised land, as they would say. And as that is just trying to get one across, right? All for one and one for all. Trying to get one across. So what happens? Well, when that starts to impede on an easement or something like that, right? Something's impeding, right? It's an easement, meaning in real estate terms, like for instance, if I saw this tree and it was the branch was reaching over onto my property, so on and so forth, etc., it would be an easement, right? Hence the term quantitative easing, where they print more money, etc., all this other stuff. And then, of course, you have balances. Well, okay, did you purchase it? Yes. Can I see the title? Yes. Who actually owns it? Oh, where's the deed? Oh, they have the deed. Okay, but you have the title. Okay, perfect. Well, then this is what we're going to do. How about this? How about we just get some landscapers to just cut off a little bit off the side so that it doesn't bother you no more. And then what we could do is we could put a nice wall up. Right? And that wall will go ahead and protect everything. We could put like a fence or something because you don't want this to come onto your property, right? Well, that's one way to try to solve the situation, and lawyers do this all the time because they try to find balance between two individuals that are fighting, right? The plaintiff and the defendant, right? And so when you're looking at that, it's like, okay, I understand that. But there's always somebody that wants to keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing the envelope, right? Because sometimes things aren't worth the paper that it's printed on. Oh, well, then we'll use digital. Majority of the Earth's currency is digital. Only a handful of it is actually tangible. That is either in paper form or as an asset, right? So, for instance, if somebody were to force you to do stuff, right, and you had to do stuff, then you have to ask the question, why? This is the purpose of a courtroom, right? So on and so forth. So, checks and balances. Now, it was very interesting when I went into the military. Now that we understand checks and balances, I brought you full circle with checks as far as, playing checkers. I'm trying to get one across. The other pieces are going to attack, so my forces are going to come forward. And when one piece threatens another piece, I will put a bigger piece behind its back in order to go ahead and protect it, to keep you in check so that you do not move. Because that's what happens in a game of chess. Right? And then when all the pieces are done and now the king is running around by itself, remember I quoted Count of Monte Cristo where they were looking for treasure and he tried to rob him. There was sand in one and then a chess piece in another. And then, of course, balance. I talked about balance because, well, talking about balance is what happens in the courtroom, and that's what the logo for the courtroom is a woman blindfolded, right, holding a sword and trying to find balance. So imagine being blindfolded, like the three blind mice, right, and they have balance in one hand, they're just going like this. And somebody's saying off with their head, and they're just like, whatever. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. Whatever. Anyways, I digress. Now, I'm going to go into something. What's the difference between a butt plug and a boon, right? So people would be like, oh, you gay, you this, you that, oh my God. Oh, we're gonna go to war in the media, this, that, and the third. Oh, they dropped this on them, they dropped that on them, and they're off to the races, so on and so forth. But let me get this straight. You said massage it, not put it in, right? It's a joke from a movie. And then, of course, you have other kinky things like a butt plug, right? Because it puts pressure on certain areas to make things more sensitive, so on and so forth, right? Or to give people a sensation in that area. And then, of course, you have the other side, the boon, right? What is a boon, right? Sometimes a boon would look like look like a hot air balloon, right? So a boon would be like a little bag, a hot air balloon. You would stick it in there. So if you were to take a balloon, cut off the top, so on and so forth, stuff in there, that would be like a boon, right? Etc. But then you have a boon that goes on your thumb sometimes. If you're a magician, you understand what I'm talking about? So these are the things that I'm discussing, right? So think about it, right? How are all these things connected? I'm going to get into it because I started off with 66, but I'm going to go into Hinduism very soon. So please stick around. Now, when it comes to the light side versus dark side, right? Equals chains versus ropes, whatever the case may be, right? What is that, right? So you have the light side and the dark side. You have Darth Vader, and then you have Luke Skywalker and all these other people, right? Obi-Wan, so on and so forth. And then you have somebody asking, what's a real one? This, that, and the third. And be like, oh, be a real one. Please give me a reason. But then you have ropes and you have chains. Now, I saw the movie Sherlock Holmes, where there was a gentleman that was doing something, and in the beginning of the movie he pretended to hang himself, but he had a hook holding him and he had a rope. And then I saw another one where a guy, who was it, Pirates of the Caribbean, they hung somebody, so on and so forth, right? But then again, of course, you have the gallows and the stocks, so on and so forth, etc. And those are two different things. These stocks are from Knight's Tale, right? They put them in the stocks and they go like this. But what happens if you're able to get out of a rope, right? Well, if somebody's able to assist you with a sword, right, they can cut the rope, right? However, what happens if they put you in chains, right? And this is what happens in a vicious cycle, right? So then you have guns, knives, and what the hell is that? Guns, knives, and versus A. I forgot what A is. So let me get this straight. If a person gets put in chains, well, you can use a gun to shoot the chain, unless the chain is stronger, but you could use the gun to shoot the chain or some weak point. And then all of a sudden, the chain breaks, right? Forcibly. You could put somebody in ropes, but then they have a knife and they saw or cut through the rope, trying to give a brother some hope. And so with that, you have to understand that somebody who is a tyrant or whatever is always going to try to keep their slaves, if that makes sense. And if that's the case, why do they need them? And whom are the ones that are over everything? There's 7 days in a week and 7 continents and 7 seas, right? Remember, checks and balances. Some people get paid every week. Some people get paid daily. Some people get paid monthly. Some people get paid every fucking 2 weeks. Remember that. Now you have what's it called? What do I have here? Let's do Marvel versus DC. Right? So in one sense, you have DC Comics and then you have Marvel, right? But what happened when Thanos came? Because it's like, how do I say this? You have angels in the outfield, right? If you build it, they will come. You can do anything you want, and then you realize you can't for some reason. You don't know where the transgression was, or who dimed you out, so on and so forth, etc. And somebody put a lore on there, because I remember Doctor Strange, who was a doctor that could perform magic, right? Whether it was surgery, all this other stuff. And if you haven't seen The Resident on Netflix, go check it out. Amazing. Definitely check it out, because there's a surgeon that messes up and then tries to get everybody to cover it because of the laws of the military where nobody messes with Doc. But if Doc just killed somebody on a table intentionally and then try to get other people to cover up, well, that's a problem. And I'm pretty sure one of the actresses in there is from Wakanda. So, why did Doctor Strange tell Tony Stark there was only one shot at doing everything, right? And now the lore goes is that Doctor Strange was saying multiple things. However, he was trying to save himself because of the, well, power and everything else he was connected to. He was tapped into the dark side. But you also have to remember whom instructed him, who had like an eye in the back of her head or whatever, right? And when she had an eye in the back of her head and everything, she told him, you do not understand everything, etc. And then Miss Marvel comes out of nowhere, so on and so forth. Miss Marvel, Marvelous, whatever, and just is like, oh yeah, and kicks his ass. Because if he was able to see so far forward, then how the hell did he know? Or how do they know? Right? I mean, think of the Infinity Stones, right? All this stuff to get, the rings of power and all this stuff and everything else like that. And then you watch the movie Eternals and you realize that, the ones they worked for, they were popping those things out like nothing, like Skittles. So, I mean, come on, like, what's going on? And Tony Stark inspired me, but I realized at certain points, he also was used to the point where they literally not ripped his heart out of his chest like, David Blaine did for somebody, but he literally, had a piece in his chest. A piece of his heart was gone, right? And it all started with a bunch of other things, which came from war. Hence the term butt plug earlier. Didn't want to say that, but I had to. So now we get it. Now that we got that across, right? And so what's the difference here, right? Because remember, obsession leads to oppression, which leads to depression, right? Those are 3 strikes. Oh, I'm fascinated. I want to get real close. Ooh. Oppression. Oh my God. I can't let this person go. They're not going to get, I can't release them. I don't want them to go out. It might be this. It might be that. And then people start freaking out because they like their toy, their science project, right? So they limit actions, movies, and everything like that, money and everything else. And then depression. What was the thing that made the most money during the Great Depression? Entertainment. And so, moving from Marvel over to DC, you have other people in there, right? You have the Martian, that's in DC. I think on CW, it's some guy that looks like John Diggle, if you know who that is. And then you have the Justice League and everything else like that. But they all have their own things, right? And then you have Wonder Woman, who's amazing, and in certain comic books she was with Superman and Batman. That's a whole other story within itself. So it was one of those things, right? But what happens between Superman and Batman? See, Superman had power, Batman had money, right? And then at one point Superman got into a fight with Batman, right? And Batman cheated. He used kryptonite, right? And he was like, ha, now I could take advantage of you. It's like the movie Riddick, right? Now you could take advantage of the beast that's fallen, blah, 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 blah. Right? And the person's screaming at them. And then at one point, he realized, okay, how do I improve? Well, then when, I think it was Lex Luthor or somebody came over and showed money, or what's it called, kryptonite or whatever, he goes, that doesn't work on me. What can I help you with? He goes, what? He goes, that doesn't work on me anymore. What can I help you with? He's like, oh. He goes, do you need help with something? And he picks up like a rock or something and cradles it for a second. All right. And so I was just like, oh, that was so interesting. How can I free myself like that? Right? How can I accomplish that? Because when I was younger, I was like, Tony Stark and Batman don't have any superpowers. They're just really smart, have a lot of money. I think I could figure that out. And I did, right? Because I saw that they were always able to outsmart the other stronger entities that were out there, right? And then, of course, Superman and Batman pretty much had balance, like California or the West Coast and the East Coast. One side has all the power, Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, all these other things. And then you have the money, the World Trade Center, so on and so forth. And then the checks and balances, Washington, D.C., so on and so forth, etc. So I start to connect the pieces and connect the dots, right? And when I look at it, I look at the Iliad versus the movie Wanted. And then, of course, it's one of those things where I was like, okay, the Iliad versus the movie Wanted versus the MLB, right? So let's say you're a pitcher, not a catcher, if you know what I'm saying. No pun intended. But let's say you're a pitcher, not a catcher. And they say, yo, I know you've been sitting there, you know these players. What can I do to do something like fastball, curveball, a slider, a changeup, like what's going on? Or should I just, walk this person, etc.? Like somebody, please, right? Because you have the batter, the pitcher, the whole outfield, the catcher, and then the umpire, and then the crowd, cameras, and witnesses. And so I look at that and I'm like, oh, interesting. And then I compare that to the Marvel movie, right? The movie Wanted and the whole thing, right? Because they were only trying to save one in that. And I talked about checks and balances, but you can get other people across, right? And so as I'm looking at this, I said, okay, what's so special about the Iliad? Well, now I mentioned the Bible, I could bring this in. Well, the Iliad is, I think, called a novel. It's a collection of stories and books, sometimes referred to as the Canterbury Tales or other things, so on and so forth, right? And when you do stuff like that, it's one of those things where you have, Troy, and you remember Elena or Helen, right? Helen of Troy, Elena of Troy or Helen of Troy, started a war. She hooked up with Paris, so on and so forth, etc. The king found out because he had a lot of money, power, boys, and everything else, and he unloaded on everybody, right? And Paris was innocent, sort of. He might have not known that she, was tied, or, metaphorically speaking, tied to somebody. But they had fun. They rolled around, right? Similar to Genghis Khan's daughter, right? She would say, if you could beat me in a grappling match, I'll let you do whatever. Or at least that's what she stated. If you don't, I'm going to kill you. I think that's what she stated. But anyways, I digress. Getting back to the movie. Which is what you're watching right now, or you could call it a video. It's so weird. So, in the movie Wanted, there was a lot of stuff going on, and the way the kid beat everybody was with a bunch of rats that had watches on them. And Angelina Jolie, Morgan Freeman was in there, and so on and so forth, and people found out stuff. And he's like, you know why I did? And he starts getting upset. You know why I did what I did? And blah, 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 blah. This is why. Your name came up. Your name came. I think Common was in there. He sings the song Glory. Your name came up and your name came up. And that's why, blah, blah, blah. If I didn't do what I had to do to that individual, we would have never had jobs and all this other stuff. And there was a guy in there from the TV show Hustle called Danny Blue, right? He was one of the guys. He liked to train him up in boxing and stuff like that. And it was interesting because they were all standing in the room, the most dangerous ones. And Angelina looked at the kid when, Morgan Freeman did this whole thing. And if you watch the movie, it was a particular technique they were able to do. And she goes like a curveball and hits a trigger and takes everybody out in one shot. Boom, 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 and smiles, and even does it to herself. Now, you can't do that. See, that's Order 66. And if you do Order 66 or 69 or whatever, and you want to keep pushing the envelope, because psychologically you're stuck on stupid before somebody sees black, all right? Psychological color code for combat, logistics, or law enforcement, etc. Look into it, please. It's one of those things that you have to look into, right? Because what's 988 for? Because you have the Ethiopian Bible that has allegedly 88 books in it, right? So there's more to the story. So why did the murderer / killer get off before Jesus? Anybody figure that one out? See, because you have KJV versus all the other versions. All right? So if I say I'll be back in a sec, right? Am I innocent, or am I coming back in a second to go find something out because I don't know? Or am I going to bullshit you so I can get whatever I want? Now, if you watch the show Hustle, Albert is talking to someone and he goes, con men are not thieves. We are the aristocracy of crime. Legging it is not an option. So on and so forth. Now, that's a con person, right? A con man, confidence, trickster, etc. Blah, 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 blah. And so they'll say whatever they have to get what they want from you, right? Well, murder and killing are two different things. And I'm going to get into the distinction in a minute. But he was innocent, right? So why was he innocent and then accused? Well, was he a con man or was he innocent? Because somebody was saying that if somebody saw something, somebody said, oh, great. So what was it? The Book of Clarence or Credence or something like that. Oh, great. Now I could go ahead and do this, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, yo, do you know how much money we can make with that? Same thing happened in Sinners, right? In the movie Sinners, Michael B. Jordan or whatever was, what's it called? Starting a thing, all this other stuff. And people kept like, hey, what's up? Hey, what's going on? And then pushing the envelope and things like that. And it's one of those things where he was protecting the kid with the banjo that was playing the music, right? The sound of music. I told you I was going to round robin this bitch. But there's other places where they have music. Stomp the Yard, right? Etc. And the only reason somebody came in, etc., was because he was enjoying a dance battle, but then his brother got killed. That he used to dance with. All the time. Not just once in a blue moon. Which caused him to come back, if that makes sense, right? And destroy everybody. And the group of misfits that, were losing, he brought them back. Kind of like Jordan when he went to the Wizards in his old age. Right? You had to show them strategy, how to move on the court, how to go ahead and, pass the rock and pass the ball, etc. Don't drop it, etc. And keep going. Like, never back down. Right? Michael J. White, which was a Freudian slip earlier, right? Leading into this. Told you, our round robin was in Never Back Down 2. And he took a group of misfit kids and taught them how to fight. Right? Everybody had a different fighting style based upon their body type and everything else. Now, going further back, even into medicine, when I mentioned The Resident, you have to do things holistically. This isn't account-based marketing, segmentation, right? Group classing, right? A disc profile, Myers-Briggs, Hexaco, etc. This is something that people need to work on, right? And the reason why I came out like this was just because of all the changes that have been happening, not only in society, but I've borrowed other people's phones and I saw what they were seeing in comparison to other things that were on my device. So I needed to make sure that the narrative was being orchestrated either correctly or not. Because if not, the only way to defeat a mass group of people, right, is to divide and conquer, right? Sun Tzu, Art of War. In order to beat your enemy, you must know your enemy better than you know thyself, right? And how do you win in combat strategy? Mortal Kombat, whatever the case. Even in Mortal Kombat, not Street Fighter, everybody has their own capabilities. And then, of course, you know, everybody has their own way of fighting, their own style. You have Aikido, you have Shotokan, you have, what else? Goruju, you have JKD, you have my style, SDK. You have other ones. You have, what is it? Kung Fu or Gong Fu, right? You have another one. You have Kali, Salat, and I'll get into all those a lot, right? There's a lot of them, especially Tai Chi, right? And you could see Tai Chi being done in the Karate Kid and everything like that with Jaden Smith. So, you know, people, the reason why I brought up, to go back, and I digress, getting back to the main subject, innocent, in a sec, so on and so forth. We don't want you to go anywhere. We want to know how the hell you're doing. So you're going to stay here, etc. And then we're going to see exactly how you know what you're doing, right? It's like putting somebody in captivity so you could study them like an animal, right? And I once remembered in history, there was a couple people that were doing things, and they actually strung them up from the Eiffel Tower and hung them and made them dance like puppets using electricity or with the metal in their body or whatever the case that they were trying to use. And it reminded me of Vlad the Impaler, you know, whether he did one thing or another one. But if you play pool, DMX was in a movie called Belly. And in one of those, if I remember, he takes a pool cue and he shoves it up someone's booty because he was trying to do something wrong. And so people didn't understand the pool terminology. So, you know, he had to understand that. So figure that out, right? So, moving forward, people want peace, but don't want to understand verbiage when it comes out of one's mouth, right? So communication, verbiage, CV, right? Get them out. So what's traditional, right? So traditionally in self-defense or anything else is considered killing in the traditional aspect of the manuscripts, the spiritual textbooks, etc., right? Some people would call this religion, right? But then again, you get upset over religion, but you'll go see a fucking UFC fight with a BJJ person and somebody who studies Muay Thai and not complain at all. And then, of course, murder is premeditated and planned, right? That's why you have first, second, third degree, etc. And you can see this because there was a movie called Revenge with a blonde woman who was also in the movie or the TV show The Resident. That's right. And she's in there and she's a doctor, hand doctor or something like that. I forgot what it is, but it's one of those things, right? And then, of course, there was another one where somebody planned this whole thing out because he was wondering who killed his dad or this, that, and the third and everything else. But nobody really understood what was going on, right? And the librarian, remember, there's a serpent brotherhood. What is that? Now you have peace versus pressure to change to chaos. So going to the title that I first mentioned, Sound of Music, right? There was a lot of restriction. The kids weren't happy, right? They were doing the correct thing, but they weren't happy, right? They were bored. They needed to have fun. They introduced music and everything else, made them laugh. They enjoyed life. Hell, the freaking military person loosened up a little bit. But then you had someone that was later on in the pacifier, you know, comes over from the Navy SEALs, super strict, rigid, so on and so forth, etc. All right, everybody shut the fuck up, blah, 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 knife hand, blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, okay. And they're still not listening. So he's like, okay, your names are going to be too hard to remember. So you're red 1, you're red 2, you're red 3, etc. You're red baby. And then, he's trying to transition his language into theirs so that they understand it. Then he has fun. But there's a boy in the movie, right? Because he has an older sister that's kind of self-conscious, if that makes sense, right? So he tries to be on the wrestling team because you're supposed to be a man. You got to do wrestling, right? But the kid likes music. He's more artistic, right? He likes to wear his beanies every once in a while. Speaking of which, it's a little chilly out here. Don't know if you know. Think somebody got a winter storm. But, he'll wear his beanie, so on and so forth. And I think at one point he caught him wearing, he had blonde hair in the movie and everything like that in the pacifier. And he wanted to be himself. But the interesting thing that struck me the best was when he went to the high school or the college. No, it was the high school, not the college. And the wrestling coach, who was clearly out of shape, who was teaching wrestling. Not any high school I've been to, but another wrestling school. This was in the movie. He comes out in a singlet. He's like, I'm going to show you and blah, 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 blah. And he's like, yeah, And he goes, this is called a chicken wing, when he tries to do like some sneak attack on him. And then he calls one the pacifier, and he takes his hand like this, like chicken fingers, and he puts it in his fucking mouth. Like a woodpecker on a tree. How much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could? So, if you understand all that, not only did he get to see somebody stand up for him, right? So he knows that there's a strong male figure that accepts him, that he can now emulate and know that it's okay to rise. So remember, checks and balances. You have the pawns, the little ones, and then the mommy and papa bears and everybody else, the family, the cousins and everybody else. When they try to elevate, right, the pawns to move them forward in life, they have everything behind them. Not just one. You've seen Aquaman, Knight of the Seven Seas. What's it called? And then, of course, he was also able to show them a different way, right? The psychological war, remember, I talked about the gun, the knife, and everything else versus using words, right? Most people don't like to use words because half time they don't even know what the fuck they're saying. So when that happens, you have to look at the distinctions between certain things, right? Because in one aspect, Luke Skywalker gave people the ability within the Jedi community to have families, provide them more with a salary of some type of nature, right? And they were able to have something like a phaser or, whatever that they would use on Star Trek. But in another aspect, the female wanted to be more traditional. At least that's what the story states, right? And then you have the lady with the head thing, I forgot her name, Ashka, whatever, Ashkosh Bagash, whatever, with the white lightsaber. And I remember in A Knight's Tale, it reminded me of the hat that she wore when she walked into the church with Heath Ledger. And one of the things people didn't understand was the power of words, right? And the reason why I bring this up is the power of words, because we're talking about peace versus pressure to change to chaos, right? Murder and kill, right? MK. Where's Ultra, right? Do you guys like music? You ever went to Ultra? I don't know. Heard it's in Miami. So it's one of those things where I was just like, oh, okay, interesting. So, looking at everything, I'm like, okay, MK Ultra, you got peace and pressure, A Knight's Tale, but the people didn't want to do that. They wanted to dance, right? They wanted to have fun. They wanted to understand who this person was. And so Chaucer, you know, is his speaker, right? Because Heath Ledger's riding the horse right now. What's it called? And he gets invited to the ball, so on and so forth, etc. And he goes to him, he goes, yo, I don't know how to freaking dance. He's like, it's really simple. Let me show you. Remember this time my mother showed my friend Tony how to dance one time. And so he's talking and he's giving instruction as like a dance instructor would. My buddy Ryan would know this. But, you know, it was one of those things where it was like, okay, because me and Ryan danced before. And so did me and my friend Lewis, right, in California. And it was one of those things where people, because we were dancing, some people you could tell real quick, they were either like sexist, racist, or whatever. They could, oh my God, it's two guys dancing. What's the difference between that and a b-boy battle? Or b-girl battle? Or breakdance battle, right? So, I mean, you look at all those things and you're like, oh, okay. And so he's trying to teach him. And he's using his words, right? Because Chaucer is the author of the Canterbury Tales, which A Knight's Tale derived from, and I got that from Christopher Campbell and J.M. Robinson, who was my English teacher, one of them. And so when I saw that, he's giving the instructions. He goes, ba-da, 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 and yet not doing it right, blah, 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 blah. Right? And the guy gets pissed real quick with words and he punches him in the face. And then Chaucer goes, grabs a tampon, puts it up his nose, and he goes, and again, twirly, 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 you could punch me all day because you punch like a what? And one of his friends, Roland, he goes, like a girl. And he goes like wanting to punch him again, but then he saw that the other person was having fun, and now it's 2-on-1 versus the hothead, the redhead hothead, right? And it's like, oh. And it's like, how can we do this? And, you know, obviously they went through and he was able to be successful. But then the person that he was going against, Adamar, right, was somebody that came from war and combat, had this sexy black armor and all this other stuff. And he had this like bloodlust, and he got pissed when he heard that he was winning. Nobody's gonna take anything from me, nothing, blah, blah, blah. To the point where he was just like, okay, well, if you could do that, why don't you show us dance from your land, your country, etc. Like a multicultural festival or whatever. And he's like, okay. And that's when Jocelyn comes in, the lady that I told you that at the church that looked like the other chick, came in and she helped him, right? It's like this, and they dance, so on and so forth, etc. And he gets upset because he wants Jocelyn, right? Because he's of, I did this, I got this background, I got money, I got wealth, I got all these horses or whatever you want to call them. I got food, I got a castle, I'm a man. He just competes, etc. And at one point, he gets so disgruntled that he tips his spear and it goes through Oric's shoulder, right? And there's like a piece hanging out, like a missile hit him in his shoulder. Boom! And he got hit. And now he's working with a damaged shoulder, so on and so forth, etc. And they're looking at him and they're like, oh, you can't fight no more. Like, your shoulder's done, etc. He goes, what? He goes, you can't fight no more. Your shoulder's done, etc. He goes, he doesn't say the word, curse word. He goes, you know what? Latch it to my arm, etc. Because his father told him that a man can change his stars, right? And though his father was blind in the movie, it was one of those things that was very interesting, right? Because before that, he was locked in the stocks, right? Stock market, stock price, stock whatever. Got your hands in cuffs and your head, so on and so forth, ready to get chopped off at all three. 1, 2, 3. 3 strikes, you're out. In the stocks, right? Shallow how, right? Gallow, shallow, if anybody understands that. And so you could take everything out all at once, just lock them in there, so on and so forth, etc. Throw stuff, shame them, etc. All this other stuff, whatever. At the end of that movie, I remember he hit that dude so hard, he flew off his horse and won. He dismounted him. And he says, you've been found wanting, you have been weighed, you have been measured, and you absolutely have been found wanting. Wanting for more is what should have been there. Because why? You got to go to war. You got the privilege of ranking up, having a guaranteed salary. You got to do this for fucking fun. You also got all the land, everything else, so on and so forth. You also got the women. You got everything else. But because I'm going after this one person that you now want, you want to claim, etc. You're just wanting. It's called gluttony. And so with that, I want you to watch that movie intensely and think about it psychologically instead of watching Clockwork Orange. I digress. Peace versus pressure to change to chaos, murder and kill, right? So you have a lot of people, you hear chaos in the videos and all this other stuff, this, that, and the third. But then you have Dr. Jordan Peterson, that's order and chaos, or chaos and order. And then you have to find balance, and there's checks and balances to that, because if chaos gets out of order, then other stuff happens, so on and so forth. And it becomes a either downward spiral, like a twister, or an upward spiral, like a cone, right? Now, planned murder is something that Adamar was building up to, which is why he said you've been found wanting. But I quoted the movie Wanted, right? Think about it. Think about it. Premeditation goes with, hey, don't worry, I got your back. All you got to do is get this to over there, etc. Blah, 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 blah. You don't need to know what happens over there. And then we're going to end it like that. So they segment it, right? Kind of like when I jumbled up the other stuff earlier, right? The tariffs, TAR, if, FS, right? And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, murder's planned and everything else. Well, so is a great magic trick, right? There's called pre-show. Any magician would tell you that, right? Go to, who is it? Not Peter Turner. Is it Peter Turner or one of them? It's one of them. But one of them has mentalism out there, right? And he talks about pre-show work and all this other stuff. Darren Brown mentions it, so on and so forth. It's in Sherlock and a couple other things. I also talked about how people didn't understand that Strange could have seen, if he could see everything, including the future, minus the position he was in, because he was found wanting. He only said there was one shot at it. But then, when you talk to S.H.I.E.L.D., and you talk to Nick Fury, right? He goes and calls Marvel, and she beats him up like nothing. She goes, oh yeah, this, whatever, etc. Weird how that worked, right? So weird how that worked. Now, killing is normally done in self-defense and everything else. But there's other things in here, right? So we have, and we're about an hour in, so if you want, you can go ahead and take a break, so on and so forth, pause, go grab a drink, etc. Then return back to this whenever you want, and then, continue on later. But let's get into this, right? So in Greek, now that we have an understanding, right? Because obsession leads to oppression, right? Because we got to oppress you. We got to hold you in place, right? And then, of course, I'm going to press the button, so on and so forth, right? So depression, how do we deflate this balloon? Who's puffing their chest out, etc., right? When a cobra gets real big and spreads itself, right? Or a snake wants to do that, what does it do? It looks like a heart, right? It kind of looks like a heart when it does that. And so, you have to understand that, right? Because if you turn it upside down, if you're looking at playing cards, a heart very quickly could turn into a spade. And a spade is a symbol for something else. Now, in Greek, the phoneu means murder, right? So it's spelled Phoneu with an O and a little line above it, right? It's right here. Hold on, let me see if I can get that there. So it's right there, right? Kind of like what I did here. Where is it? Right here. With the two eyes, and then I put them together and it kind of looks like pie or whatever. So that's that, right? But that's Greek. Remember that. And something was translated from that. Remember that. And I also got on the topic of murder and everything else, but why did that person, Barabbas, right? But if you watch Pirates of the Caribbean, it could be Captain Barboza, right? Why did he get off first, but not Jay? Was someone found wanting? Because if you remember, before we had the written word, we had oral tradition, and oral tradition was based off of phonetics, etc., right? Hooked on phonics, etc., phone addicts, etc., right? And then you have people that would say something so stupid out loud, like stealing valor, or that's blasphemy, right? Which literally translates to treason. My ass may be dumb, but I ain't no dumbass. Attack on one is like an attack on all for one and one for all. So mind your P's and Q's, right? Your problems and questions. Now, blasphemy, called treason, right, is a claim to be king in translation, right? I not only looked this up on my phone, but trust me, I've been in several libraries. And I do read books, not in the past 1.5 to 2 weeks, but I have gone to Raleigh. And if you want, you could track me if you want to. Not like you haven't been. So, what's the difference between Shiva and Kali? Now, you remember this is called Finding Freedom, but then there's also Final Fantasy. You have Fast and the Furious. You have Finding Forrester, etc. That's a good movie. That's where somebody, Sean Connery, actually has to step up and state that the words that he was saying came from somebody else that was, well, of a different color that was being picked on in class intentionally. But the thing is, he didn't want to be known. He didn't want to be seen. He didn't want to be out there in the open, right? So therefore, he hid and let certain things happen until it got to a point where it was so devastating, he had to stand up and say something. Because some people will just want more. Remember Standard & Poor's? Well, if the Dow 30, now that we're going to get into Shiva and Kali. Kali is also a martial art, fought with sticks. Now, when you get into this and you're found wanting, right? You want more, 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 more. Now, if the top Dow 30, well endowed, right? 30, right? You have 3 sticks, or 3 snakes, I should say, right? You have the ambulance and then the hospital, which has 2. Dow 30, right? Now, what happens with a wooden dowel or Megatron or whatever, Megalithon or whatever, right? When sharks smell blood in the water, their eyes get real big, kind of like my sunglasses here, and they turn black, right, etc. And I've seen it happen in certain things. Their pupils dilate. It's like an aphrodisiac to them, right? Because they're hungry. But the thing is, the reason why sharks are hungry is because they're always moving. They have to, right? You flip a shark on its back, it goes to sleep, especially a tiger shark. And if you want to ask me how I know, is because I had a person named David, right, do it in front of me while I was observing them swimming around, so on and so forth. They were perfectly fine, right? And somebody was like, oh, you're betting with a lot of lives. I don't gamble with human capital, okay? Remember that. I once stood naked in front of this lady because she just wasn't getting it. And I said, nobody ever asked how David beat Goliath. And the reason why I'm going to this is because I mentioned the Iliad. The Iliad has Troy. Similar concept. And I said, how did David beat Goliath? And I'm there. I said, you have the statue of David. And you go up and you say, huh, it's really not that big. Interesting. He's really not that tall. Interesting. But then you go to Madame Tussauds House of Wax or whatever, and you have Dwayne Johnson and all these people. And my mother went one time with my Aunt Grace, and I literally see her. She goes like this. Oh, I just wanted to see it was like life proportion or life size, etc. Because he's so big, right? And so I'm like, if you have somebody like that, right? Or Andre the Giant or whatever the case may be. And then you have freaking puny little David, that's like 5'6", 5'8", whatever, right? Not that big, right? And then they're like, oh yeah, well, I'm bigger than you. Okay, well, I got a body like you. Oh yeah, well, my thing. And then it gets down to the point where, like I mentioned in Hustle, where Danny Blue goes to Mickey and goes, you know what? I bet my Willie's bigger than yours. And he's like, you know what? You're probably right. You play the law of averages, etc. And he's like, let's just go here and get whatever we can so we can go back and make some drinks. Whatever the case may be. And so as I'm standing there naked in front of this lady, I'm like, do you not understand he beat him with technology? See, he was a slinger, right? And a slinger can propel a rock between 40 to 60 miles an hour using a rope with 3 little hooks like this, like a pocket, and you stick it in there, and then you swing that bitch and you throw it, right? Kind of like a lasso, right? So if you ever seen the cowboys when they're riding and they're trying to round somebody up that's, you know, running away, or like one of the calves, and they go with the lasso and they go like this and they pull it up like a collar or a leash. So it's something like that, right? Now let's get into Kali and Shiva, because most people don't understand, and because they're tied to certain words, because I prime them with martial arts, they think Kali is something that's martial arts. But let's get into Hinduism. Shiva, meditation, king, god, entity, also power of time, otherwise known as Chronos, or Shava, right? This would be, yeah, Shava. Translation, corpse, right? Meaning corpse with an E at the end. C-O-R-P-S-E, right? So power of time, corpse, etc., blah, 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 and meditation. Then you have Kali, female, primordial energy to create, destroy, and change the world, right? I'm going to say that again. Shiva was a man or masculine energy. Kali was feminine energy that can create, destroy, and change the world. Shiva gives Kali context, right? There's content and there's context, right? So before somebody gets upset, you have to explain something. Then now you have people going manosphere, women's sphere, this, that, and blah, blah, blah. Left hemisphere, right hemisphere, this, that, and the third. You have the content, right? Oh, you like the Gap? You must be gay. I like the Gap because I'm gangsta and proud, bitch. What you want to say? Right? And so if somebody takes offense because they don't understand what that means, then they would have to elaborate. And that's where the context comes into, right? Here, let me write this down since you can't get the clues, right? You're not picking up what someone is laying down, right? They talk about war and people are like, yeah, this, that, blah, 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 blah. And the moment something happens here, I'm guaranteeing you something's going to happen over there. And then they're going to have to send everybody that's signed up to meet their quota to go over there. Now, Shiva gives Kali context. Kali gives Shiva agency. She is power for Shiva in, I think it said, 30. And so with that, you have to understand when it talks about like things like in the Iliad, the Battle of Troy, 300, etc. In 300, Leonidas kicks a messenger down into a hole. Just before he does that, though, he looks at his wife, right? She gives the permission. Now, what did it say here? Shiva gives Kali context, right? So if you see somebody shivering or shaking, so on and so forth, like, I don't know what I'm going to do right now, but my power level is going past 9,000, right? And so he looked at his wife, Kali, and gives him agency, doing a small nod of the head. And he does a smirk, and he's like, finally! And he does his thing, right? Because that's what makes him him. So when somebody says, nigga, shut up! Oh, I must sound like DMX now. But you don't like that tone because we don't talk like that. On this base, we talk like this. Yeah. And they keep going and keep going. And then you confuse the mind. Remember, the war is first fought in the mind and then fought on the battlefield with the body. But if you don't understand the 3D world that somebody keeps freaking saying, I would like to refer you to KRS-One. And he goes, I want you to, here, we'll take this. Tropical punch, not tropic thunder, but tropical punch. And then this is body armor, right? So if you're training, you're gonna need water so you can fill this up, right? This kind of looks like a primer is struck, so shut up, right? And if you were to hold this on one side, like this, and you were to hold this on another side, and do some high knees and everything else and run in place, well, when they tell you to put your hands up, you're already in position. Your thumbs are supposed to be able to touch your eyebrows, right? So you can train that way. You confuse the mind, the body will adapt if it does or doesn't. If not, then the mind will get convinced that it needs to adapt in order to belong. All right? And then people have a problem with the LGBTQ plus community. I love RuPaul. How do I know? Because I used to watch RuPaul, so on and so forth. People thought Dennis Rodman was gay. He was with Carmen Electra. I used to watch, me and my boy Lance used to literally chill on the sofa sometimes with his wife or girlfriend or whatever. And sometimes we'll just be chilling there and he's like, yo, you ever seen Queer Eye for the Straight Guy? I was like, yo, I love that show, right? And there's a black guy on there. He's like more masculine, but he could switch if he needs to. But it was one of those things where there's a guy in there. Oh, he reminds me of Ryan so much. Is it Carson? I think it's Carson. Because there's another one with long hair. He's a hairstylist. Long hair, beard, and everything else. But they were trying to make a match, right? It's like the movie What Women Want with Mel Gibson and the blonde, right? But then you see Mel Gibson in the movie Expendables sitting across from Barney and Christmas, and he's losing his goddamn mind in handcuffs, saying a bunch of stuff. He was also in Braveheart. Think about it. So there's always more to life, right? Remember, Standard and Poor. Remember the Moors, right? I had a friend named Moore, where Sammy was acting like this guy that I was driving around, and he was pretending like I didn't know what was going on. And she told me something. And I said, Gavilanis, I said, what's going on right now? And she's like, I'm gonna stay with her. Apparently Sammy started talking to her and now she wants to do something to herself like Basoko. And I got hot, I got heated. And somebody saw my face or whatever and my body and everything like that, and I offloaded on Sammy. And he's like, what are you talking about? I said, you're hearing it from the person's mouth himself, or the lion's mouth himself, whatever. Whatever fucking context clues I gotta give you for you to fucking understand that suicide is something that you should not fucking play with. So, if you don't know how to dance or communicate or whatever, right? Try to find freedom because you have to remember, music and dancing are a lot better than gunshots, bullets, knives, pistols, and everything else. There used to be an expression, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Where has that gone? Now you got shows like Fresh and Fit. Remember, I mentioned, Finding Freedom, Finding Forrest, or whatever the hell the case is, right? And they're like, who hurt you? Who hurt you? Who hurt you? Etc. Then they're like, oh, well, what's your body count? Well, how many people did you sleep with? Then you have shows like Empire. And my brother-in-law reminds me of the oldest brother. Don't get me started, right? Because I could turn into Terrence Howard real quick and a mixture of Cookie if I need to. But he had an issue. He was dating this blonde chick, all this other stuff, yada, yada. He starts freaking out. Jamal has an issue. I think he actually faked something in reality. And then one of the kids, because he was gay, I think Jamal was gay, one of them. And he was scared to come out. I have no idea why. It reminds me of this movie called Boots in Netflix, where this person from like Recon or MARSOC or whatever branch in the military comes in as a drill instructor. And is like, the guy gets stuck at the top, right? And it reminds me of when I saw this little bear that was stuck in a tree or whatever. I was like, oh shit, like, should I help it? Whatever. And then I saw the bigger bear over here and I was like, oh, we gotta go. And so he took off, me and my battle buddy. But that was a whole thing. But the Stairway to Heaven, right? It's one of those things almost every military base should have it on their obstacle course. You climb high enough, you go over the wall, so on and so forth, and you climb back down. Well, his thing gets stuck and he's waiting, and then the instructor literally realizes, oh, he's stuck, right? Kind of like that Cardi B song. If it's up, then it's up, then it's stuck. And so I was just like, oh, okay. Well, then we could change this right now. I was like, okay, so if he's stuck, what's gonna happen? And then the instructor goes up there, grabs him, unhooks his thing, brings him down, because he was hooked, right? Like, you remember Hook, Peter Pan, he was missing a hand, so on and so forth, because he was scared of something, the crocodile with a clock in its mouth, or alligator something. And so he gets him to the floor and he goes to him and he goes, if there are no gays or faggots allowed in my Marine Corps, what the hell are you still doing here? And the kid's in shock. He's propelled. He's like, what? He goes, fall back in line. He goes, okay. And then literally he goes and he whispers to his buddy, hey, I think he knows, so on and so forth. And the guy his buddy looks at him. He's like, duh, it's okay. And that's one thing that people don't understand, is that it's okay. Remember, in another video, I discussed that they wanted to go forth and multiply, but what did that mean exactly, right? Well, if you were to multiply, meaning teach this to other people so they have full understanding, and if you want to prevent someone from doing that, then you can tell them, you will not lie with a man the same way you lie with a woman. But I talked about cleanliness. Remember, Jesus was a healer in the Bible, healing the ailments the way the hospital should be doing, right? So if you go in without a condom with a female, there's a specific puzzle piece that goes in it. So if I were to draw a puzzle piece and there's a hole, right? Major look, you can literally see that the puzzle piece goes together like a butt plug, if that makes sense. And so the thing about the butt plug is that feces and fecal matter and all that stuff comes out of there, right? And so if you don't wear a protection, that's why they used to have lambskin condoms back in the day, to protect it, right? Because it would feel the same way, right? Then you would, since you have a small hole, right? So like if somebody's giving you a injection, like a little prick on your forearm, There is a bevel tip, and then there's a hole, kind of like your parts, right? And that little hole, it goes both ways, right? So if you have fecal matter going into there, it's an abolishment or whatever the case may be, because you're literally packing the tube with poop. So you want to make sure that you do it probably after a shower or something like that, not like after going to the bathroom, etc., right? Think about it. There's no need for people to get upset. I saw, who is it? The movie Constantine, and this guy reminds me of it, and I'm going to say it and end with this right here. John Constantine, both in the TV show and the movie, specifically the movie, there's a part where Gabriel's in the other room, right? And this person has played different roles in a similar role every time. And he has this woman that's pregnant, so on and so forth, etc. And he has to call the devil, Lucifer, whatever his name is, out from the thing, and he comes up in a white suit looking like freaking everything, like he's in, Saturday Night Fever. And he's like, John Constantine, the person I've been waiting to meet. And he goes, your Gabriel, or your son, is in the other room. He goes, what? He goes, your son is in the other room with Gabriel, who's trying to bring him here. And he goes, what? He's like, I don't believe you. So he stops time, and he literally walks over to the other room and sees Gabriel holding a blade, so on and so forth, etc., ready to, do what they have to do to get because the son wanted power. And so he stops him immediately from doing that, right? And so that happens, etc. And he goes back to John. He goes, what do you want, etc. He goes, I want you to heal her and bring her sister back, etc. So I want you to heal her because she had a twin sister who was in an insane asylum, right? Mental health ward, whatever. And I want you to heal her and bring them both back. He goes, okay, done. And he goes, all right, cool. Now you could come with me. And as he's trying to pull John away, he forgot that the self-sacrifice, because the weight that John now just passed on, that so many other people understand that may carry, became difficult. And now, all of a sudden, he starts getting lifted into the heavens. And as he's leaving, just like I did a long time ago, somebody mentioned that at a party, he literally looks back at Satan and goes, and it just reminded me of all these things, right? Or Lucifer or whatever. Because of the fact that I was watching Ben Shapiro, and he was sitting next to a Navy SEAL who was like a transsexual or cross-dresser or something, and he kept egging him on. And the Navy SEAL leaned over and said, if you do not stop, and he whispered something, so on and so forth, he goes, I'm going to do this, and this to you. Right? Remember the dance analogy from The Knight's Tale? Similar concept. But Ben didn't get it. He kept wanting to push the envelope, right? And so why I mentioned that is because there's another Shapiro that I see on Instagram. I forgot his name. I think it's Mark or something like that. And he reminds me of the person in the movie. And I'm going to say this carefully. Your son is in the other room. If you ever seen the movie The Wire, you understand what I'm talking about. Why did Candace Owens get kicked out, but you kept Jordan Peterson? JP Morgan Chase? Anybody? Out of chaos comes order, etc. You're in a very high position. You may share the last name, don't know if you're actually related, but you should understand how business works in the world of social media and communication, because that should not occur. Because if that occurs, then the other thing occurs. The very two things that was dictated somewhere else, that people don't like and have a problem with, that's accepted somewhere else, is okay. In the movie Men in Tights, there was a rabbi that came by, and he had wine, and he was talking about cleanliness and circumcision and everything else, because just like women get a yeast infection, if you are uncircumcised, if you don't clean yourself properly, you will get a fungal infection in that puppy, and it will probably turn into gangrene and fall off. So you have to understand certain things, right? Think about it. Till next time, my friends, I will see you on another video or lesson of finding freedom.